Welcome everyone, Dr. Thor here. Let's get another little brief update here on this David Berkowitz. Let's talk about his military career. Now, I encourage everybody to the highest possible degree to click on the link below, spend 20 minutes, and you'll get the entire Son of Sam story. It's all there. It's done by a professional. I believe that probably 95% of the information there is correct. It lays out his life, all the things he did, and all the disinformation you've been fed by a bunch of boobs. Just as simple as that. Let's talk about his military career. Now, I've kind of pieced this together. This particular link does not talk about his military career much, but he did spend 4 years in the military and left with an honorable discharge. Now, from what I understand, he asked when he was 18 years of age, after going through all sorts of problems his entire childhood, and torturing animals, setting fires, having to go into actual therapy so that he could even stay in school because he was a very disturbed child. So we need to fully understand that as part of this process. And this kind of lays it out. There's no use me repeating all this. I mean, Dr. Todd Grande does very well. So this gives you it all. But let's go into his military career. So he asked to go to Vietnam, which shows a person who, a very unpopular war. Why did he ask to go to Vietnam? I mean, this shows a homicidal attitude. What he wanted to go to Vietnam wasn't for the Vietnam beer. It wasn't for the food. It was the fact that he wanted to go over there and kill people. It's pretty obvious that this is what he wanted. So he wanted to get into action. Now, we have to wonder why at this particular time that the military didn't send him there. We don't know if this was because whomever brought him into the military, at a time when they needed people in the military as well, because people weren't joining during a war. They were always short of people. I mean, so this wasn't something people really did at this time, because nobody joins the military generally when shooting's going on. You don't want to be sent to a war. So we have to wonder what happened here. So did the military recognize that this person may be a danger if you give him a gun in a military zone? Well, we have to take that in consideration. The other problem is that all governmental institutions are wacky as hell. The point is I knew a guy who joined the Air Force in the 80s and had an actual learned Arabic. And of course, you're talking about the 80s. And you think this person would be super valuable and given a certain understanding of where. So he was expecting to go to the Middle East. Where do you think they sent this guy in the Air Force? They sent him to Germany. Well, that's pretty weird, but that's so military. So why get qualified people anywhere? This goes with the whole process of the incompetency of levels of this society and the military in general. So he was sent to Korea. Now, as it goes with this, there is a bunch of hearsay, and we're really not sure how valuable this is. Now, there has been stated by some people that this is, of course, when he started to go wrong. Well, we have this guy had 3 head injuries. He was torturing animals. He was at the age of 13. He was in therapy, or they wouldn't let him stay in school. And there's many other things that went on. It's all laid out there. No use me repeating it. If you want to be educated in this area, go to that link, and even go now. Don't listen to me any further. Go there and listen it all. But when it comes to the military, he wanted. So he was upset and angry that he wasn't sent to the war zone. So he was sent to Korea, which is a bizarre situation, because you got to remember the Korean War is still a war. It's going on. There hasn't ever been a peace treaty. There is an armistice, or whatever they call it now. So there's a ceasefire. So that war has never been over. Another one of those wars that you don't know anything about. And the fact is, just another war that the Americans have lost, as they usually do. And I don't think America's won any war, at least not by themselves. Obviously, World War II in both theaters, Europe and Asia, the Allied powers did win those parts of land. So it's irrefutable. And it wasn't America. Both of the World War II was both in the Pacific and Europe was won by the Russians, who accounted for 75% of the German casualties and was putting enormous pressure on Japan. And people don't understand that Russia kind of borders Japan in a weird way. And of course, they had pressure from China as well. So they didn't have a hole, but they were brought to their knees by the fact that from firebombing and other things there. And if they didn't surrender when they did, they would have lost 40% of their population to starvation. Because everything was firebombed. So, these are all the facts you don't know about. So, but the bottom line is that it's not the fact that the Americans won and the Americans lost and the Axis powers. No, it was the Allied peoples. An awful lot of people fought in both of those theaters, particularly Asia, which had the Australians, it had the Dutch, it had the French, it had the Filipinos, it had the Chinese. There's a whole bunch of people fought in the Asian theater there. So we have to understand that. And there's a fair amount of people fought in the actual European theater. So we have to understand that as well. Certainly the Russians had already horribly beaten the Germans and took over most of Germany. This is a fact. So that war was over, and the Russians were the ones that claimed that territory, and they were allowed to because they were butchered by over 20 to 30 million Russians were killed by the Germans, including about 5 million people that were starved to death. So the whole idea is that this is the reality there, without getting too much off the beaten track. But it just shows you how goofy things are. Now, let's get back to so he was there, and what happened at this demilitarized zone where he was stationed. Well, the reality is, and this is true in a lot of places like this, is the fact that the North Koreans, who really didn't give a damn about everything, this is very typical, is that they would shoot at the Westerners on the other side of the wall there. They would shoot, they would cause problems, and of course the very typical cowardice Americans and all their little allies that are in South Korea were not allowed to shoot back. So this enraged him, that he would be able to be harassed this way without responding. Now, this sounds terrible, but on the other hand, do you really want to start a giant war because somebody's playing with you? And of course, learn to have some control of the incident. Now, I have to wonder, I certainly would do things a little bit differently if I was the commander there, but that's why you have, night scopes and other things. The point is that they didn't want to move this into a war of any further. There already was peace, and if these guys want to be jerks, well, I don't believe anybody was killed. They're harassing people. But this drove Berkowitz crazy, apparently. This really was upset. He started writing back bizarre letters, supposedly, and all that went with it. I'm not sure who he was writing to. There's several people that claim they got letters, and I have to wonder why. And it's also claimed that he started taking, because of the stress of this situation, triggered all his other stresses. Now, you must understand that this guy was a complete bonkers wacko when he went into the military. The military just made it worse, where he was put under pressure, was in a situation where basically he could act up to a degree, being in a... and again, you didn't get thrown out of the military that easy back then, because they didn't have a lot of people. So remember time errors. This is also a time where people smoked dope and other things, and they were able to get away with it. If you're caught with marijuana in the military now, they take you directly to prison. They don't play any games of what it was. But back then, people were doing all sorts of wild things, and it was a much more free-going military and fun. But the whole idea is that he took supposedly a lot of drugs. Now, I wonder how you can function in the military if you're whacked out all the time. So I'm not entirely sure that's true. Again, these are the stories you get from people that really are not able to be confirmed, but is believed by a certain group of researchers that really can't be trusted. Nobody in this case can be trusted. So a lot of people blame this on why he went gaga. But then he started writing things, all sorts of strange stuff that he was writing, and then he was quoting the Bible. Usual crazy stuff that people do as they start to further lose it. But this wasn't caused by the military. This was brought out by the military. This guy's a long history of torturing animals, setting fires, etc. Now, we don't really know what was going on there in the military. There has been some talk, and it's hard to believe that he would get out of the military with an honorable discharge if he was setting fires and doing other things. But there is I don't believe you can burn something down in the military and they look the other way. I don't know how that would possibly happen, but there was some talk he burned down something, that there were some problems going on there, but there really doesn't show anything in his record from what I understand. We'd have to look at his record, and of course, all the great researchers haven't gotten any of that information. They're still looking at a bunch of nonsense. So we got to understand that this whole case is a prime example of how everything is screwed up by everybody possible that touches it. All the so-called government representatives and all the amateurs know absolutely nothing, and they don't even bother to get information. And if someone approaches them with good information, they tell them to get lost because they don't want you, an intelligent person who knows what's going on, you are a threat to them. And certainly should be, because why would you possibly follow boobs like this? But let's get moving on here. So apparently that's what happened there with his service record. So he was discharged honorably and came back to the United States. This one's the trouble started. What's interesting is it used to be in the 80s and 90s, there was a little thing called going postal, where postal employees would kind of lose it and start shooting people. And of course, where did he get a job at? Well, he got a job at the post office, which I think is ironic. But of course, that's again age-based. If you're not in your 50s and 60s, you probably never heard that. I think there was a comedy movie or so even made on that, because there used to be postal employees that would go nuts and start shooting people. This was even mentioned in Steinfeld, the comedy show with Newman. So this was something that is quite interesting. Now, this is where his strange behavior, but this strange behavior was not caused by drugs or the U.S. military. We're not entirely sure how much drugs he took there or not. If you're that wacko and you're taking so many drugs and you're so delusional, as these letters supposedly were from him, it's hard to believe you could function in the military. How did that work? How did that happen? How did he do his job if he's whacked out all the time? I just don't get it, especially to the level that he appeared to be. Again, that doesn't fit the puzzle of functioning properly. So he comes back and he, of course, gets a job at the post office. He gets a job in security, the usual places where people come back and get work because you're really not qualified for anything coming out of the military. But he was honorably discharged. And he did spend 4 years there. So he got through his entire contract with the military before he came here. And of course, this is when everything started to have problems. Now, there is no link to MK Ultra. There's no link to anything happening to him in the military. None of this can be proven. And people have to be careful to fall into the same old conspiracy theories that everybody's controlled, everybody's doing this. I don't believe that for one second. The things that Berkowitz did is classical serial killer problems, from the torturing of animals to his problems sexually and everything else that went on with him was the entire reality that went on here. This is a classic serial killer situation. His connections to so-called Satanism and all that is all bogus, all made up by him. And this is pretty much proven in statements that he's made and even in the numerous letters that he wrote, that this was all nonsense. And this is the type of person he is. This is not a person we can in any way say the poor boy was brainwashed, controlled, etc. This is all nonsense. He did have a terrible life. He had serious head injuries. His adopted mother died at 14. What a tragedy that is. He saw numerous people murdered, or not murdered, die in front of him. This is unbelievable at such a young age. He was a big problem in school. He was bullied. He bullied other people. He had a very violent streak, and he was under therapy for a few years that did absolutely nothing. So these are the type of things that happen. So, and then, of course, he went into the military, and I got to think the military somehow saw he was a bit on the unstable side, even though he had a normal IQ, and decided to send him to Korea. Or as I've already said, it could be just a typical military screw-up, which they're so famous for. So this again gave him an outlet. It also trained him how to be more violent, how to use weapons and everything else that you get in the military. So it was perfect training for a serial killer, so he could come back and feel comfortable with weapons, etc. Now, he also talks about how he felt during the murders and how he used to get off on it, and he used to enjoy the feel of things, and that how when he didn't shoot people, he'd go out to previous spots where he had killed people or places where violence had happened. So this is a very typical person who's getting off on this. And this is all well documented and by good, reliable sources that most of this stuff has happened as I've just told you. So his military career is something that is not anything surprising. There doesn't seem to be any connection to any kind of military MK Ultra programs so that we can tell. Anything's possible, but we got to be careful to jump into these conspiracy things unless we can really know about it. And the fact that there's a lot of pundits out there talking how common this is just isn't true. Now, there is a giant, apparently corrupt element within the government that are pedophiles making a fortune off it, which has been documented for many, many reasons by many people. Now, this is different than MK Ultra, which again mixed in. Apparently, there's all sorts of spooks and others involved in this massive pedophilia operation to blackmail people, control them, and to make lots of money. We can't mix everything together. We can't take everybody out there. Now, he had no connections to any satanic organization per se. Now, whether he got together with certain bizarre groups, well, there is no proof of that whatsoever. And of course, we have real serious problems because everybody's been misled by Maury Terry, who put together a fantasy story. And of course, he got a lot of bad information too. And we'll cover that in my final and last Son of Sam talk here, which I will be putting up soon. So that's where we are. Stay tuned for more.